Welcome back. Welcome back. Oof. Ooh, 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 goodness. We're not wearing our token sweatshirt this time, and we're gonna crank down the lo-fi hip hop down so that it is just us. But for those watching the VOD or that will be here soon, thanks for coming back for installation number 3 of our Scoop Universe production exposition. Episode 1 was 3 weeks ago, almost at this point now, where we talked about, it was a pretty long episode. It was about 2 hours the first time, and we talked about kind of introducing Scoop Universe. What is Scoop Universe? Who are the characters? Who are the main characters? Kind of a lot of the structure of the show, a lot of the DNA that is kind of underpinning a lot of the inner machinations and twists and turns that kind of dictate a lot of literally like these pattern structures that go from episode to episode, how there are these kind of like 2-1-2-1 segments that kind of make up the overall body of the whole show. We talked about a lot of that stuff in the first episode. The VOD, again, is probably gone by now at this point, but I'm going to be uploading them to YouTube so that I can have these in a finite locked place somewhere. Last episode, we read the pilot script. I had written once upon a time the pilot script to kind of what in my mind was going to be episode 1, the one that would kind of premiere first, or that we would kind of do a mock-up of in order to show to producers or executives or just the people that with the resources that would make it happen. And it was pretty fun. I think people had a relatively good time with it and experience with listening to the broadcast there going through. I mean, it took longer than I thought. I was pretty surprised. I don't know the rules of kind of, people say all the time for like film writing for scripts and stuff like that, of like movies and shows with real humans, in terms of like a page is this much time on screen. And I wasn't really sure how it was going to work. I had kind of table read it to myself a long time ago, and I kind of made it out to be about 26 minutes. And that was about what I wanted it to be. But when I read it through this time, it actually took a little bit longer. Reading the movement of the scenes and kind of explaining some things made it actually go about 35 minutes or something, which is actually longer than I thought, because the episode doesn't really actually have that much happen in it. There's most of the action sequences are kind of through a montage, and it's just a lot of kind of dialogue between a lot of the characters and introducing all the characters. They kind of come on one after another. We see Scoop, and then we see Pompola, and then we see Biscuit, and then we see Trip, and the characters just kind of interact with each other and just kind of a little ad-libby kind of segment with each other. And they run throughout part of Pompola's jungle castle and leave it up to begin another episode where they're about to go off into who knows where to solve who knows what. And I kind of intentionally left it open, but I hadn't read the script in almost over a year. I've been working on this a long, long time, and so I was glad that a lot of the script kind of held up. And so this time now, we are not going to be talking about the pilot. We're going to be talking about what is, as far as I understand it, definitively going to be the true episode 1. If you think about the pilot as being episode 0, what we're going to talk about today is going to be the true episode 1, or part 1 of the first episodes. On Thursday, we're going to be doing another episode talking about part 2 of this first episode. And I know a lot more about the characters and the plotting and the kind of elements of the second half. This one is going to be a little bit interesting because I haven't gone back to this episode in a long, long time as well. This show has kind of taken on such a life of its own, and it's gone on for so long, and I've been working on so many of the deeper parts of the episodes, like the 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 numbered episodes, not 1 and 2. I mean, 1 and 2 came up a long, long time ago, and I haven't really gone back to them. And so in the same way with the pilot, we're actually going to be seeing a lot of new stuff again for me in terms of what I've written down, because I am going off of on my screen here. I'm not going to be showing it to you guys, but on my screen here, I have the pitch Bible, and that's what I'm basically been reading off of and kind of sharing with you guys. What we're going to be talking about today is part 1 of episode 1, at the moment kind of coined and termed 10,000 legs under the sea, and part 2 is going to be 10,000 legs above the sea. But the show opens with after the pilot has happened, there's a time skip of kind of inconsequential difference between the pilot and episode 1. The pilot talks about how Scoop kind of was underwater and was found he ends up drowning under the sea in a submarine and comes back to floating atop on shore and is resuscitated through some kind of pseudo-magical, pseudo-technological technology that Trip has access to, and it kind of shows their connection in terms of their ability to resuscitate Scoop like this. And Scoop kind of awakens in the pilot and says, like, there was something down there. Like, I know that there was something there. I was so close. Something, like, massive. Something amazing and something unseen. And, again, Trip and Scoop in particular, along with Biscuit and Pompola kind of as side characters, are heavily, heavily invested in mapping Scoop universe. And so Scoop was down there plumbing the depths of the ocean in order to find and kind of go to these corners that he hasn't seen before. And he comes across one of these corners, and we're going to be talking about corners today, hopefully, I think. He comes across one of these corners and ends up literally dying before he can figure out what is there. And so this part of episode 1 is a return expedition down into the ocean and across a number of characters and one particularly mythical beast that ends up being down at the bottom of the ocean world planet. And that's kind of something that's kind of unclear is this another world in itself? Because there's Pompola's jungle planet. There's Trip's little Dragon Ball Z like Castle Lab planet. There are other planets and worlds in Scoop Universe, again, because these worlds are like continents that are in 3D shaped, in spherical form, that interact with each other and orbit around each other. And it turns out orbit around significant gravitational structures that compose the outer limits of Scoop Universe. And that discovery is something that comes up a lot later and becomes a major, major focal point of Scoop and Trip's expeditions, again, out into Scoop Universe. But so Scoop and Biscuit essentially hop back into a submarine type vehicle. Whether or not they have one kind of multi-purpose vehicle that can kind of transition and shift, allowing them to transport themselves across these planes, or like kind of a pseudo amphibious thing, could definitely be the case. In the pilot, it kind of ends with Trip activating a portal that he had created to allow Scoop to kind of jump a gate from one planet to another when they're in near orbit to each other. But it could be really, really cool. And those kind of details are something that we would work out like kind of on the writer's team, on the writer's table with the show, in terms of the consistencies of progress and travel from one world to the next. But Scoop and Biscuit by themselves. Pompola stays back on her planet. She has stuff to do. Trip is kind of off camera doing his own things. And as, again, our little mini reminder from the very first episode, I think, when we were talking about a lot of the structures of the show, was I would love, love, love it if every single episode opens with a cold open. So just kind of like a single, the show begins. There's no intro sequence. There's no introduction of any other characters. It just opens with Trip in his plot line, kind of in his narrative, watching his real-time research and scientific process and scientific progress through his quest, which is kind of understanding like what is at the heart of making Scoop Universe tick and work, and why are these planets doing what they do? What is at the edge of the universe? What is beyond the edge of the universe? Why is this place here? Again, in relation to the history of the universe and the history of the characters, the universe is relatively new compared to Scoop and Trip and Biscuit, as far as we know. There is no map. No one has mapped everything that's in the universe. And it's not even necessarily an incredibly large universe. As we'll come to find out, the major crux of the show revolves around, I think it's something like 10 different worlds. There's Pompola's main planet. There is this dubious ocean world. Is it a planet? Is it just this interstitial fluid? And I do talk about that in a separate piece, and maybe we'll get to that. But there is an idea of kind of an ocean that suspends all of these planets together. So it's not like they're just floating in space, but it's as if there are these kind of different forms of materials and structures and elements and states of matter that allowed them to kind of be suspended and orbit within each other and connect to each other. But there is definitely an ocean, whether it's an ocean world or this fluid, like the fluid within a cell that kind of keeps all the membranes where they are and ballooned out to the edges, and all of the organelles kind of floating or structured, connected to the membrane itself. Those kind of things, again, are what Scoop is trying to discover and map out and kind of understand. And Trip is really kind of fundamentally trying to understand the core designs of the universe. On one level, he has these bizarrely godlike aspirations, or at least wants to, in that scientific kind of trope, play God in that way. Maybe not play God yet, but he at least needs to set up his understanding of the sandbox that God would be playing in. Scoop wants to map it, and Trip kind of wants to understand it. Yeah, and the giant green pea soup of the world. But this first soup that they go into in episode 1, in 10,000 Legs Under the Sea, is an ocean. It is kind of characteristically just a traditionally understood ocean. It is the ocean that Scoop floats up from when he dies underwater. His body kind of floats up in the pilot episode and washes ashore on Pampala's shores. They dive back down into that, and there's kind of a, like, in a lot of the illusions, again, every single episode and character and narrative element has a style guide associated with it. This is kind of something that I think is going to help make Scoop Universe stand out a lot, but it also might be way too tall of a task. I have no idea. But every single character has a relatively different style guide, illusion, cartoon show allusion to the design of their character. And so this 10,000 Legs Under the Sea episode has a lot of SpongeBob-esque designs to them. The villains and the characters that we see are kind of in the animated style and stylings of SpongeBob. The main characters aren't necessarily in that same style, and whether or not this will be too hard to execute, I'm not sure. Whether or not we ultimately just draw references and details and kind of ornaments from these characters, like in SpongeBob or Courage the Cowardly Dog or Powerpuff Girls or Dexter's Laboratory or Venture Brothers, whether we just take kind of fundamental elements of them and put them into the Scoop Universe design, I'm not sure. But I think it would be awesome to have a literally kind of a different animated style for every single character. What the artist toll would take, or what kind of toll that would take on the artist team, I have no idea. Might be really cool, might be really exciting, but one of the major real elements that I want in Scoop Universe is this idea of that everybody is different, everybody is unique, but yet there is this ego death in the sense that the otherness of these characters is not vilified like we kind of see it in our natural world. There is this cartoonish separation of ego that I want to have exist in Scoop Universe, where the characters, I mean, they aren't obsessed with the fact that other is other. There is no violence necessarily kind of manifested in the fact that you don't look like me. Everyone in Scoop Universe knows that nobody looks like them. There is no kind of shared vision to even build a community on that rejects the other in it. And so when we dive into this underwater zone, we see a lot of these SpongeBob-esque animated characters, and especially kind of, if you remember the extra kind of darker lines and shadows of the SpongeBob movie, there's a lot of that in here, because when they go down underwater, there is a primary villain with the kind of written name as it is right now. His first name is Cux, pronounced Cux. I am not sure if that will be able to fly, but his name is Cux Toasty, and he is he's like a pirate whale that rides a shrunken down, almost like a motorcycle version of a boat, of like a pirate's ship, and he just kind of single-handedly rides this around the underwater sections of this, again, planet or ocean. He is kind of the primary villain that the main characters run into and have kind of combat or interactions with, but there is very little kind of written, scripted, bloody violence in Scoop Universe. Most of the episodes, though there is action and stress and drama and kind of engagement, there really isn't much true physical violence. There isn't going to be real bloodshed on screen until potentially later on in some of the darker episodes. But they run into Toasty, who has a domain underwater like this. That is another huge, huge, huge element of Scoop Universe, is that when they go to these places, there are people that are entrenched there. Like, their community is there. Their people are there. They've been there forever. This is their place, and you're coming into it. But the fact that Scoop is understood as this kind of multi-world arbiter gives people pause, or at least allows them to just accept his presence, not as an evil policeman in that kind of sense, but literally as kind of a peacekeeper. And his presence is hopefully not rejected or fought against, but obviously certain characters will. But there is this understanding that Scoop is visiting them. He's not here to stay necessarily, and that they have priority here. Like, just because Scoop is this sheriff of the universe does not mean that he understands everything fully, does not understand the intricacies and the nuances of even just the culture of where they are. And so a lot of the conversations of culture and educating Scoop, I mean, when Scoop goes from place to place, there is education involved, because he has to be able to understand what is happening here. And this dialogue makes up the primary vehicle where I want to use it to express and engage with and communicate all of these topics of kind of current, relevant social justice issues, kind of identity issues, communication issues, relationship sentiments, just interpersonal conversation, and what it means to have someone show up and have to open up your culture to them, or open up the understanding of how you see things to them in order for them to understand and then act, presumably in the face of some kind of dilemma. And so Scoop and Biscuit run into Toasty, who owns an underwater barcade that is purple and green and black and blue, neon kind of glowing, settled down deep in between this like dark coral reef and sand in the edge of this underwater space. And there will be some really interesting and like kind of cute interactions with this kind of bizarre little villains bar, in the kind of a more colorful and animated version of the bar of like the tough guy bar from the SpongeBob movie. I mean, there are those allusions to that kind of necessarily, but there are some other characters alongside Toasty, including, so just some of the names here that we have are ship. So basically his like crew, is kind of his gang of homies, includes, as is written right now on the pitch Bible, a character called Shipface, obviously like kind of a shit-faced meme. A little kind of like goblin gremlin creature called Pea-Spit, that I love that name. I think it's such a good like little just like gremlin sidekick, like Gollum-esque, like right-hand man to the bad guy, the kind of hunched over creepy little devil guy. And then Vitamin Chaser being another type of character that is probably going to be closer to a foil to Toasty, who they interact with underwater, and there is some kind of combat or understanding between Toasty and Vitamin Chaser. But so they have this arcade bar that they kind of go down to, and it provides the kind of opening light that drives them down, or kind of draws them down underwater, and they begin interactions with these characters. And most of the episodes going forward are kind of broken up into two halves. They are a first 15 minutes with kind of a first primary character, and then a second 15 minutes with a second primary character, or a second kind of primary arc. Ultimately, that means the show will be split up into cold open with Trip, followed by the first interaction with a kind of a new character, or a new person, or a new lord, or a territory, or community, that then bridges them into the second half of the episode, or kind of the third of the episode, where the a character that is kind of talked about in hushed tones or these kind of mythical reverence or combative fury or just ultimately confusion in that first half. There are these conversations about, okay, we are here now. Who are you? I am Scoop. What's going on? They will talk. There are interactions. There are movements. There are problems and little puzzles potentially to be solved. There are little scraps to be evened out. And then they are going to be interacting with, okay, there is this thing that is over there. And now, Scoop, you have to go over there or discover what is over there. And most of the time, that first character doesn't follow them or doesn't help them because they have their own place. They have a place to be. They have stuff to do. They are an existing real character. And in many cases, Scoop is now here because there is something to solve or understand that those first characters can't. And so Scoop acts as this, what it turns out to be, this reincarnatable, resuscitatable hero alongside his very mortal friend and companion Biscuit. And even that tension is going to be certainly taken advantage of. They then go and bridge that commercial and go to that second place, and then the deeper, darker, larger, wider, whether it's villainy or confusion or sadness or complexity, is then explored. So they run into Toasty, and they have this kind of like underwater arcade bar series of scenes. And again, this is the place that Scoop he hadn't died in these waters. He's been here before, but he then understands and communicates with them because he comes from the pilot episode, and he goes, I know I went over there. Like, I got to this extra darkness, and do you know what's there? I mean, that I got to that, and he will probably, Scoop is an unironically a good guy. He believes in the goodness of people. He will share legitimate secrets and information with people if he thinks that they should know, or that it would help them, or that it would kind of serve to help the cause. Again, there is this ego death that means that secrets and information sharing is kind of free flowing, hopefully. And there are characters where this information is not free flowing, and they become necessarily more villainous purely by comparison to the characters that share this information openly or without vulnerability, or with a known vulnerability that understands that hopefully this person I'm sharing it with, if I understand them correctly, won't punish me for it. The villains will punish them for it, and the villains will also withhold information in that same way. And this juxtaposition is probably going to provide a lot of the kind of movement in terms of who is a good guy and who's a bad guy. And you don't really learn too much of it in this episode, but we will allude to it later, in the sense that Trip is going to have a lot of secrets that are not going to be shared. And this is going to cause some problems for his goodliness. Biscuit and Scoop are going to be open books in many cases. Pompola, it turns out, might also have some secrets. And for your heroes to have secrets like this raises an eyebrow from the audience and raises an eyebrow from the reader and from other characters if they can understand what's going on. That to know, like, wait a minute, there is something weird here. There is something, I don't know the full picture. Why don't I? Because I tend to know, or other people tend to share with me, even as a means to kind of push out or reveal the villains who don't tell everything that is to be told. And so Toasty is going to have some hesitation with sharing or opening up with Scoop in this kind of semi-villainous way, because he is like a bad guy. He's like a thug from underwater. I mean, he runs kind of a gang of kind of ne'er-do-wells that pillage and steal and do some bad guy stuff. But Scoop will eventually kind of prove Scoop's self on camera in this way of convincing Toasty to be able to share information with him and kind of resolve a semi-villain who isn't really a villain in the sense that, like, the mob isn't a villain to the mob. They just have a code. And people that don't have that code might see it as extra violent or unusual, but Scoop is going to bridge this kind of semi-villain and bring him over into opening up and kind of sharing these communications with them. And so what they eventually realize is that in the first half of the episode, Scoop comes to them and probably solves some kind of minor debacle with them, or there is like a race or a series they have to fight in the arcade bar on a game, or Scoop has to prove himself in that way and he just like smurfs on them, or Biscuit steps up and like really hard carries and kind of earns some trust. Extra communication occurs. Scoop shares some more, opens up, and realizes again, I was over here and I died. Like something happened underwater and I don't know what. Like, do you know what could have happened there? And they help progress the mystery and unveil some of it, and telling them that there is something like immense underwater over there. And before you get to it, it is guarded by a series of kind of kelpie people that are these like underwater shapeshifter, mermaid, merman, pseudo characters that are again on the edge of villainy and literally exist on the kind of the edge of the territory. They are kind of the other to even Toasty, below sea like this. And there are engagements and interactions with some of these kelpie characters, and Toasty and his gang kind of share some information, allow him to have kind of access to a secret that Scoop didn't know that allows him to point him in a direction to go over in that way. And that kind of resolves the first half of the first episode. When they eventually make their way over there, and there is kind of, as in reading the, Right. Yeah. So in reading the pitch Bible that's here right now, there are songs that kind of pop up in each of these episodes, and there is this like funky, very like a bass submerged underwater that kind of like pounds and echoes out through the ocean that will either be an opening for the show or kind of a midway sequence between that first and second half, or end the show in this way. But a couple songs every now and then kind of pop up. They don't really have lyrics. There are some that are sung by later characters, but this one in particular doesn't have any lyrics. And it's just kind of this like bizarre bassy beat. And the idea of sound, and especially we talked about already the idea of having an ASMR episode coming down the line when we get to talk about that. I'm really excited because I have a lot of stuff written for that. But the role of sound in kind of this very intricate and kind of harmonious and literally kind of like ASMR type way, I wanted to play this very tone setting, mood setting role, obviously, in the show, and probably more so than other cartoon shows will hopefully have. But where they go from the second into the second half of this episode is towards these kelpie people. And Scoop hasn't necessarily, he didn't really know of these people before, and so he also wants to go there again for mapping out the universe, being able to add to his map and have these communications with these folk. And when he gets there, this chunk of the episode, and we're going to talk about this kind of in this sense too, that like I don't have every single one of these episodes truly written out. The ultimate structure is complete for every single episode, but from minute to minute and word to word, I don't necessarily know everything yet. And that's what's super exciting, to be able to still have a lot to do with a team in order to flesh this out and make it real. But there is a ton of stuff that is done, but not all of it. And that's still what keeps it really exciting for me, is because I haven't written every single one of these episodes yet. I haven't gone step by step and second by second through every word of every episode yet. Still working that out and how they interact, and keeping those kind of pieces floating and moving around each other, much like Scoob Universe in that way, is really interesting and exciting for me. So I'm going to now share kind of what I know about this second half, but it's not fleshed out, and maybe we'll learn some things in talking about it right now. But quick little hot cocoa sip. Again, shout outs to Ushka for making our hot cocoa sipping stream starting soon, Bubo. But so there are these pseudo mermen, these shape-shifting mermen and merladies and merpeople, that exist in a kelp forest of sorts, that are kind of on the edges of this ocean planet. But it turns out that they are directly below the ocean that is under Pompola's planet. So there is kind of Pompola's planet up here, and Scoop goes out this way out into the world, out in towards kind of towards the center of the world, and we'll eventually show a map probably. I'm sure. He kind of leaves Pompous Planet and goes out towards the center, kind of out into the ocean and then down underwater. But then he kind of has to loop around and come back under Pompala's planet, where there is this kelp forest that has kind of grown in these worldly rotations from debris and plant life and stone material and organic and inorganic material that has kind of, fallen off of Pompala's planet, broken off, been cast off, and it kind of settled a new ecosystem beneath Pompala's planet in this rotating ocean space. It turns out, however, that this particular space is not rotating, that this kelp forest is actually always there below Pompala's planet. And that gives extra insight into the fact that this actually isn't an ocean world like all of the other planets, in that they rotate and are on orbits kind of consistently moving. We kind of learn two things. A, that this is not moving, and B, that there can be planets that don't move. And while we know that there are some that do, it turns out that some things are fixed in Scoop Universe and some things are not fixed. And then some are kind of in between, literally like this interstitial ocean. And so Trip ends up learning this and starting to dive into this and understand, okay, what is going on, and now that means which ones are structured and kind of sessile like that, which ones are rooted, and which ones rotate, which ones orbit. Are they orbiting around the ones that are not moving? Are they orbiting around something else? Are the ones that are fixed for a reason, attached to something? We don't really know. And again, Trip is desperately invested in understanding this, as we will then find out 2 episodes from now in a flashback where he has his own episode, that he is under threat from something on his side of Scoop Universe that he needs to essentially solve for his own well-being, let alone everyone else's. So they go into this kelp forest that turns out to be rooted below Pompala's planet of Orta. And there are some kind of silent engagements with these kelpy people. There will be some trickery and shapeshiftery in just understanding kind of where they are. I'm sure they will kind of put on these masks and take on shapes of characters that they know or don't know. And there becomes, again, just a series of engagements and understandings with Scoop and Biscuit kind of making their way down into this new uncharted territory. The kelpy people probably kind of protect this area. Again, it is a kelp forest in that sense that it is kind of these long kind of strands of tree-like and just fern-like and just straight seaweed structured, almost like mini mazes that constitute this kind of hidden section below Orta. And as they move through it, or continue to go through it, they bump into some characters that will show up later, or rather that will show up in the past, because there are one of the kelpie characters that is kind of going to run into, again, a flashback episode. She is going to show up, that is essentially run by, or kind of has been built alongside and with Caitlin in the kelpie combinations. But we see a character that we will see later, but we don't know that yet when we see them here. And there's a lot of this kind of like back traveling and time traveling in the sense where you will see characters that we will see in the future, in the past, and will allow some kind of replayability of these episodes. But as they get deeper and deeper into this kelp forest, they start to discover that it turns out that there is a massive mythical beast called the Jade Flower that is underneath and behind Pompala's planet of Orta, that has essentially been growing there for who knows how long. And it gives you kind of Atlantis, like if you remember the like Disney, Pixar, I forget which kind of movie it is, but Atlantis, the movie, the like giant crazy like crab, lobster, ruined underwater behemoth kraken things. It has a super duper vibe of that, but while being combined a little bit more with like the super octopus, multi-tiered, multi-armed kind of behemoth thing. And this is also going to be our first introduction to the use of scope and size in Scoop Universe. I love it when there are these massive, massive sections of difference in terms of just the scale within a frame. That there is going to be like Scoop in a little, like in the foreground as this tiny character, and then just this gigantic thing that is off to the side, whether it's even fully focused on or taking up the entire rest of the frame is probably not likely. It's going to be like stumbling across just this massive hydra that is essentially in a cave. Again, that's where it's supposed to be. That's where it's been growing. That's where it was maybe born. That's maybe where it's going to die. That is the place that it is, and there is this ownness of self in its position there. But this massive difference of scale is going to be something that I really, really love to put into as many of these episodes as I can in a bunch of really different and interesting ways. Because I just think most shows are straight up don't do that. I don't know why they don't do that, but it looks amazing. It provides that mythical power to it. I remember one of the Seven Deadly Sins, the anime. I think it's like season 2 or 3 or something like that. Did a really good job for me of being able to convey like the mythical power of some of these super bad guys in the way that they just had like an aura that seeped from them and affected characters around them. And I thought that it had this really cool parallel to World of Warcraft in that way, where you have these auras that just affect a zone around you, and of how the more powerful characters literally are indicated by having a presence that physically, spiritually, emotionally, magically affects the things around them. And the giant structures and the giant creatures and organisms and characters are going to have the kind of closest thing to an aura like that hopefully we can convey through a sense of size and scale and framing like this. And so there's some really cool shots I have planned and envisioned of this Jade Flower Kraken that is essentially behind and below Orta. And I'm not even necessarily sure how it's resolved yet, what they kind of do with it. They certainly don't kill it. They just simply learn about it more than anything. And they also learn kind of a secret that there's this petrified wood that they find and that Trip captures kind of secretly. And that's something that we see at the kind of end of every episode in particular, where Trip kind of finagles and sneaks his way in to either gather resources or gather information or plant something or steal something. And that sneakiness where we see him acting and other characters don't, again, gives us this sense of Trip is up to something, or he is not. Why is he not doing this kind of openly? Why is he not working with Scoop to do this? What's going on here? And so we see that there is this bizarre type of petrified wood that is going to be connected to the Jade Flower. And the full understanding of that wood isn't really understood yet. And it turns out that it is kind of forming a part of the kind of bedrock of the kelp forest and of things that have fallen from Orta, and a connection to the Matt going crazy. A connection to the world, the jungle world above, and the kind of settled debris below, and whether or not the Jade Flower itself is the kind of mechanism for converting this wood into the petrified wood or giving it a magical power is kind of unclear. But the Kelpie people are essentially the protectors of this giant, seemingly set in place creature. It does not seem to move outside of its position, but it is there and it is alive. And it's doing something, and it is kind of, whether it's kept in place by the Kelpie people or restrained like that or being fed and grown and nursed up to health, again, is kind of unclear. But there is this kind of massive showing scene of this, and I think it's a really awesome kind of reveal and series of moments, and it has this power. But also in the first kind of episode just showing up, it tells us and shows us that, like, oh my god, like, it blows up our understanding of what can be in Scoop Universe. We only seen these kind of little characters and these kind of cute characters, or these arcade bars and these semi-villains riding, again, motorcycles that are boats. And then all of a sudden there's this huge like literally just mythical creature that seems to completely destroy our understanding of how old this world is, or as if it was something that predated all of these other characters and has been doing so and proven so by whether or not Trip kind of carbon dates this petrified wood and shows like, whoa, oh my God, this has actually been here for a long time. I actually really like that idea. I know there is an idea of that I've been working on in terms of Trip understanding like dating the universe is really important for him because he doesn't know how old the universe is. Like no one knows, like that kind of stuff. He is looking for clues and hints to understand, okay, when was Orta here? And he will come to realize that with this petrified wood, he'll be able to prove that it's been here for a certain length of time, and then connecting that to the fact that it came from Orta, understand that Orta was now here from a certain age ago. Comparing that and setting that on a scale compared to all the other worlds and places that he goes starts to set a map of his own in terms of just the scale, the timeline of the Scoop universe. And that's, again, something he's incredibly interested in. And so the Jade Flower gives us mostly just this kind of terrifying frozen image of what can be to come, what has been, and forces beyond anything that even potentially Scoop understood. And this is a huge realization for him as well. And most likely they end up kind of fleeing in whether fear or danger or something again starts to go wrong. And much like how Scoop first died and drowned in the submarine when he first went down, there a similar thing will start to begin to occur to their vehicle or to their progress. And they will then connect it to the fact that they crack in this Jade Flower that is also built off of this ring that is not focusing very well. But this ring is called the Jade Flower as well that we've discovered once upon a time. And it doesn't show it super well, but this connection to now why why things started to go wrong is connected to the Jade Flower, potentially connected to the petrified wood, an understanding of now he can map this out and he gets some information from the Kelpie people because they they kind of don't want him to be there. They want him to go away. They don't want him to mess with this. This is their thing. They've been doing it for a while. They kind of know what to do. Just don't there's so many horrible things could potentially happen with this Kraken creature. And so they are willing to give him the information that honestly, there is nothing really on the other side of this. Behind the Kraken, behind the Jade Flower is nothing. And Scoop is relatively willing to accept this, and especially considering that they're in danger, and he takes it still as a net gain that he can go back to and add to his map and understand. He can plot out now. In the pilot episode, we see him working with this kind of blue rune map that are on the walls of his map room in Pompala's castle. He will be able to go back and uncover more of that and parse it out and understand even deeper, and to realize that he went back to where he had gone, where he had fallen, and they learn a lot. They come across a lot of things. They resolve something, that there was some tension between Toasty and the Kelpie people. So they kind of solve the mystery of the people. They solve some of the mystery of the map. They solve some of Trip's mystery of the timeline, and a lot of progress is made. And the end of the episode kind of starts to loop back into that there is something happening above on the top level of the ocean. And they have to flee from the depths of where this Jade Flower is, and they leave the Kelpie people behind. They leave Toasty behind, and Peace-Spit, and Shipface, and Vitamin Chaser, and the arcade bar. And they make their way back up to the top of the ocean, where more characters and giant ships now are soaring in and floating in. And that's the kind of final image that we see of the episode, are these new characters that are coming up alongside on the top of the ocean, while another planet as well is starting to rotate in and come down in orbit to this top level of the ocean, and potentially even connect with the ocean, not just orbit by it, but literally run into it. And that is what part 2 of the 10,000 legs under the sea. Part 2 will be 10,000 legs over the sea. And we see a whole new host of characters, where we will be talking about that on Thursday. One really cool character that I love a lot, that has a couple cool kind kind of monologues, and we're going to be introducing the two super major kind of artifacts that Trip turns out is actually in possession of one of them, and Biscuit and Scoop are kind of looking for the other one. And these artifacts will massively, massively help them understand and plot Scoop Universe in a way that nothing else could, in a way that literally seems to transcend. If anything is the oldest thing in the universe, it might be these artifacts. So we'll be talking about that on Thursday, with some spicy characters, some really kind of interesting connections, some monologues that are kind of written out, and some more really interesting kind of colors and shapes, and most importantly, again, some spicy new toys that we're going to be playing with. So that is essentially the breakdown of episode 1 of 10,000 Legs Under the Sea. I'm going to go zoom over to the comparison guide and see if I can find the characters for us. So I've written, also in the pitch Bible, there's basically like, what is this? Like a 10-page document at the back half of the pitch Bible that has the name of the character, kind of their rank, or their kind of, I talked about once upon a time in terms of how the characters have a rarity to them, where there are the 4 main characters that are all legendary, and they kind of go by like the WoW or Hearthstone and like other RPG type scalings of like legendary, epic, rare, uncommon, and common, or just like rare, common, probably. And so, for example, of the characters that we talked about already, the Jade Flower would be like an epic type character, or potentially even legendary. It's that type of scale. Toasty is closer to like an epic. He's like the main speaking role characters are going to be something along the lines of epic. Vitamin Chaser is, if he's the good guy kind of foil, will be probably closer to a rare. And then Peace Spit is like the definition of like a common character. The Kelpie people will probably be like rare type. The standout speaking characters, again, will be epic. But so I have kind of all these characters written down and their style allusion to them. So kind of what type of cartoon guide is going to be used to design their characters, and kind of how I see them and how they are playing out in relationship to all the other characters. So let me see if I can find some of these in the character guide for us as we kind of round out the episode. We found Toasty here. He's actually written here as legendary, but that's not true. He is not legendary. I'm actually going to change that right now. But his style illusion is essentially SpongeBob the movie, more than anything. It's that kind of very darker, like the more saturated, the heavier character color, darker lines, not like a lot closer to his character. The SpongeBob movie, if I kind of remember it correctly, is a lot kind of more zoomed in than an average SpongeBob episode. They're kind of, the camera is back a little bit deeper in the average SpongeBob episode compared to a movie where it's a little bit deeper up there. But yeah, so I have written down here is just kind of style notes that he's like a beluga whale pirate cartoon, with like a cartoon eye patch. He has a handkerchief and a hat, like a pirate's hat, where he rides this, take a pirate ship and shrink it down, like literally just shrink ray it down to the size of a motorcycle that he rides single-handedly. And he kind of putts around and zooms around the ocean from his arcade bar, in this little spicy little jet that he has. Let's see if a couple of the other ones are here. This is another character that might be, again, part of Toasty's gang, and mostly because the color styles are the same. But this character is kind of cute-shilly called Green Daddy Perp, where he is probably like the closer to something like the bartender at the Barcade, where the style illusion is just Aqua Teen Hunger Force. He has this like very kind of sloppier style of animation to him, like a lot thinner lines, and he's just certainly this like purple and green kind of like goofy, probably something literally like a sea cucumber type character. Let's even add that in there while we can. We're gonna probably do this hopefully a good amount of time. I love working with Google Docs like this, and if you follow the stream normally, we did a lot of these kind of live action Google Doc takes for like the Shaman deck when we played it a lot, the Rogue deck, like these explorations into kind of new worlds. I love working on Google Docs like this with a writing background. I find it immensely helpful and really interesting to work on, and it's something tangible that you can share with people. And so like the commands, if you do exclamation point commands, it brings up all the links of stuff. But I'm not giving you this one, not yet. So Green Daddy Purpose probably under there. This guy probably isn't. There's another character called Butt Chug that is a little like evil baby villain, but I think he shows up in the chess episode later that we'll see not 1, 2, but 4 episodes away. None of those are here. That one's not. There might be a band playing in the Barcade called Upright Chocolate Donut that is going to be like Simpsons-esque kind of style illusion, but is potentially going to show up somewhere else instead, or be the ones potentially playing the song that you hear echoing through the band, echoing through the ocean, the kind of like beating bass. It might be their opening song or an encore in that kind of way. But they could be playing in that Barcade down there. None of these other ones really here. Vitamin Chaser is okay. Okay, so this has him listed as a vigilante kind of mercenary that works alongside, or is not necessarily a good guy foil to Toasty, but just kind of another one of these mercenaries or part of a band that either branches off from Toasty that they potentially Scoop and Biscuit run into first, that connects them then to Toasty, whether or not he kind of pseudo betrays Toasty or kind of gives up some info about him or as to where to go, or kind of tips their hand in some kind of way. Vitamin Chaser will probably be down there in that kind of way. And he's again in the SpongeBob movie kind of style illusion like that. None of these guys are there. No, I don't think that one as well. Yeah, P-Spit is a goblin lackey type character. He was potentially going to be shown as one of the above water characters, and he might as well. He's going to kind of fluctuate between being part of Toasty's gang or Eustace Evergreen, who is going to be one of the characters that we see above water in the next episode. But he's this kind of like orc goblin creature, golem, like gross, bent over, long, lanky limbed, just like little freak guy. I just can't get over the name P-Spit. I think it's so great for that type of character. These ones are there. Okay, none of those. Okay, yeah, I think those are most of the characters. I think all these other characters are from later on. So that's a big old section there. Oh my God, there's so much on that part. Oh, okay, the Jade Flower here. So this will be the last one. This is actually the last thing that was even written. So the Jade Flower, as just to kind of give you some insight there, the Jade Flower was produced and created like way later than episode 1, which is, again, it's one of my favorite parts about this show, is that in the framing of the skeleton of it, I am going back and constantly filling in and creating the tensions and connections between everything in this way when the characters become discovered in that Scooply way. Again, if I could want anyone to take an adjective that, or kind of just a way of thinking or a way of being from this show, and hopefully, again, things like that can kind of transcend the show itself, and just in terms of communication, I would love to have happen, and it will hopefully be kind of a cool selling point for the show, is the idea of something being Scooply, is that it is just understood, that it is kind of that you just know sense, and that in Scoop has this kind of very, I mean, there is a kind of an ego death in that kind of way, and that you have to kind of forget or give up or relinquish the fact that you are like overthinking it or choosing it in that kind of way. It is almost something that is not chosen but stumbled upon and realized. And so when something is scooped or discovered in a Scooply way, it is just understood. And so the Jade Flower came scoopily, in part from this ring like that. And in just talking with Caitlin about it. And so that was really awesome and really fun to discover it. But literally the last entry in this pitch Bible was something that goes for the very first episode. And so that just gives you some kind of understanding of how constantly in flux and such a work in progress over literally years this show is. But so the Jade Flower is in an Atlantis/rocket power, I have kind of written down, style guide illusion. It is, again, closer to like epic, legendary. I'm going to read this out loud, but stop myself if I start to spoil something for you. So this is, yeah, a Kraken-style beast that grows and grows below Pompola's world, but in between the underwater world and interstitial ocean. Again, we've kind of talked about how it's not even really an underwater world, but it is in the sense that it is a self-contained place that has characters that will only show up in the underwater world. I won't spoil that part necessarily, though it kind of... So actually, no, I think this is fine to say because we'll think about this. We'll come back to this potentially later, but I have written down right now that it feeds on and potentially is responsible for or is surrounded by the petrifying enchanted oak that is seemingly dropped from or discarded from Pompola's planet. And there is a twist right here that I'm seeing that I'm not going to tell you yet. This wood Trip then harvests and realizes something about it, both in the timeline of the universe, but as well as a particular property of this wood that plays an immensely important role later on that I, again, will not spoil for you, and understands something deep and true about Scoop Universe. And so the Jade Flower is connected to, or potentially the creator of, or surrounded by this petrified enchanted oak. And so we give that little teaser secret there that it's not just wood, it is oak. And what happens with that, we will see. But that is basically the full roundup, wrap up of all of this here. Basically an hour on the nose here. It's 9 o'clock, so we're going to wrap it up. I'm glad we got to talk about a lot of stuff. This gave you some kind of a semblance of, again, the first half of the first episode. I mean, it's the first episode. If we don't cut the pilot is kind of episode 0. This is episode 1. The second half of the water episodes is going to happen on Thursday. We're going to talk about that, featuring Eustace Evergreen and another really important character that comes above the ocean, no longer in these little tiny underwater jets and ships, but in these massive kind of Santa Maria style conquistador ships that we will see and talk a lot about. And there's a really cool character that I like that plays a really important role with regards to the artifacts that are being hunted and potentially being used by our legendary main characters. So thank you guys a bunch for checking this out. I am again going to take this, put it into a downloaded form. We are going to have these. I'm going to link them somewhere at some point. If you were here listening in real time, I appreciate it a lot. It was awesome to have anyone here. But this VOD will hopefully live on infamously, and I'm going to use this to communicate my goals and vision for this show in the future. So I love that I can kind of get this out there. If no one's watching it now, sure, fine, by all means. But it's still really good to get this out loud, off the page, talk about it, share it with you guys. I love it. I hope you guys will love it. And we will see you guys on Thursday. I'm going to be streaming tomorrow and Thursday in the day, but Thursday night is going to be the next Scoop time. And we will hopefully see you then. Thanks, guys, and have a good night.